1968 was such an incredible year in American history that this is, it says, the year that shaped a generation. The 60s was a whole, this was the most crucial year in the 60s. Everything was going on. It started out with North Korea seizing the American battleship USS Pueblo and holding it hostage, and specters of nuclear war. A week later, the Viet Cong started the Tet Offensive. April, Martin Luther was killed. June, Bobby Kennedy was killed. August brought the conventions, the Democratic conventions. It was so bloody and violent. Jackie Kennedy married Aristotle Onassis. The Apollo circled the moon. Everything was going on. And a very smart lady called Agnes Nixon figured out how, in spite of all this stuff that was going on, how she could take her little brand new half-hour soap that at the time soaps were only considered a half a notch up from summer stock, and shoot it right into the national limelight. 3 years earlier, the 1965 Civil Rights Act had passed. This was just 3 years later. She shot through all these events and got total national attention by saying, "I have just created the first black star in a central role in the history of daytime television." Well, this is what they gave her. The works. Not just saturation coverage in soap magazines, but her history, her name indelible in the history books for My Hire. She is credited on the basis of My Hire. As a matter of fact, I have something around here that I want to show you. I'll show you later. Anyway, it's an entry in the Encyclopedia Women in American Television, years later, in 1999, in which she is credited. I'm the only person mentioned in her profile. And on the basis of My Hire, she's credited with this grandiose legacy of moving soaps into a new era of racial and cultural diversity and inclusion. You know, that's her legacy, and that's the legacy that she would fight for. She's still fighting for it. She was still talking about it last year at Harvard and what have you and so on. Whenever she's in being celebrated by a museum, or she's in a situation with talking to Harvard or drama groups in Academ. She always talks about Carla and Sadie, and whatever. Okay, anyway, what she got out of it was Newsweek, in addition to saturation coverage and I'll show you these. These are all the things in soap opera fan magazines that go into the whole daytime coverage. She got coverage in Newsweek. That's Peter and Me as at the head of the TV. This is later. That's TV Guide. 2 celebrity articles in that issue of the Guide. One was Sonny and Cher. The other one was Ellen Holly. New York Times. Whole page. That whole page. And I myself asked to write. Okay. Asked to write the article. Now, it was fascinating from the beginning because the storyline was absolutely mesmerizing. I started out, there were 2 characters that were on the show at the time that I started out. The show started out with a black woman called a hospital, called Landview Hospital, and there was a black woman who was the head of housekeeping at Landview Hospital called Sadie Gray. And she would talk about, from time to time, about her daughter Clara, and she was considered to be dead because she would talk about she would say, Clara is dead to me, and whatever. And then 2 or 3 months afterwards, this exotic somebody called Carla Benari came to town in the midst of a nervous breakdown and went to a doctor, handsome doctor at the time, played by Robert Milley, played by a matinee idol, gorgeous, drop-dead gorgeous guy called Ma. And he began to become fascinated by her, and they sort of ended up engaged. But meanwhile, he put her in the hospital to make certain that her problems were mental and didn't have anything to do with something pathologically wrong with her in terms of being sick, physically ill. And she fell in love with Peter DeAnda, who would be the black intern that she fell in love with. I began getting some very interesting fan mail. After living with her as a white character for about 3 or 4 months, in what I think is probably, and to this day, one of the most brilliant, Agnes is such a brilliant writer, the most brilliant use of a serial ever. Agnes had me, Carla Gray, and on a Friday, the day was very important, at the last 5 minutes, also the time was very important, she had Sadie, the head of housekeeping at Landview Hospital, and Carla Gray, for their very different reasons, end up at an apartment door. They had totally different reasons for being there. And Lillian Heyman looked at me and said, "Clara." And I looked at her and said, "Mama." And the audience realized that Carla Gray was not a white woman. She was the black daughter of, well, I mean, the brilliance of what Agnes Nixon understood about the serial thing is how you use a series to really squeeze it of all it's worth. Is if you are looking at a play or a film or an opera where you're involved with people over a 2-year period, a 2-hour period of time, you can only make but so much investment in a certain character. On the other hand, if you are living with a character day after day, week after week, month after month, you make much more of an emotional investment in who that character is. And if you present a character over here, and people live with that character through all those months on the assumption that it is this kind of a person, and then you pull the rug out from under them, because of the greater involvement and investment in their own time and emotion that they've put into that character, the shock of it is so much more than it could possibly be in a 1-hour show. So it was so powerful, really. Some people feel at that moment at the door where she said, "Clara, Mama," was probably the most extraordinary moment in the entirety of daytime, and I'm sure it was. Because over the weekend, everybody started to, that's why they'd make it on a Friday, so people called it, "Did you hear? Did you see?" You know. Okay. So once it was revealed that I was black, well, a lot of white women started writing me and saying, "What a cop-out," because they were waiting for an interracial relationship in which the woman was white and the guy was black. So they were angry that I was black. Then there was a guy in Texas who was, he had been angry when he thought I was white, I'd kissed Peter. But after he found out I was black, then he was mad that I had been engaged to the white doctor. So everywhere, which was so interesting. That's one of the reasons why I found the role so exciting to take on, because I realized that a lot of people are prejudiced who don't know that they are. They really don't know it. And when they felt about me one way on a Friday and then did a whole 180 on a Monday, it was demonstrated to them that it had nothing to do with anything tangible, but it had to do with just about, it was a very illuminating moment for a lot. Anyway, then the whole thing just exploded, and that's when all this stuff happened. Now, what she got out of it, as I said, she got her name forever indelible in the history books. She got saturation coverage in soap opera magazines. She got all of this coverage in Newsweek. And she got all the whites who were mesmerized by the thing, and she picked up a black audience that was extraordinary, because she picked up we were only 12% of the population at the time. She picked up a black audience that was in double their numbers, and they were of every conceivable variety. There were professional women, doctors and dentists, who scheduled their patients around us. There were school kids in college that scheduled their classes around us. Last year at Sag Harbor, I met a girl who had she had gone to Vassar and scheduled all of her classes around it. The hospital workers in a given hospital would all get their lunch hours at the same time, bring brown bag their lunches, and find a TV set at the hospital and watch as a group. Black maids would set up their ironing boards in front of the television at that hour to do all the ironing. We even had guys. I remember a guy who stopped his Wonder Bread truck, not on the sideline, but smack in the middle of the street, and vacated it and raced for half a block just to get my autograph. Anyway, the whole thing just exploded, and of course the ratings went through the roof. The ratings were so dramatic that ABC went back to Nixon and they said, for goodness sakes, make us another golden widget. And she started work on that cue. She began work on All My Children. 2 years later, All My Children comes online in 1970. She puts it right in front of, the woman is brilliant. She really is. She's as brilliant a businesswoman as she is a writer. She put it right in front of us. She gave it a black storyline with John Donnell. Do you remember John Donnell?
Right.
Yeah. She captured the entire black audience for us because there was only a half an hour, and they were giving an hour lunch, whatever. They started tuning in early, a half hour early, to catch John. So she captured the entire black audience in one shot by putting a black storyline on. Children took off. General Hospital looked at the kind of numbers that Nixon soaps were racking up back east. They put a black storyline on their show and ended up raising their numbers. So the black audience that the Carla storyline had originally pulled into ABC now spread out to undergird all three shows and watch them in a string. Okay. Once all of that was in place, something very interesting happened. I was very aware that something radically different was going on because I was stripped of both of those guys overnight. He was fired, and Robert Milley was transferred to a white storyline. He was very angry about that and left the show. And immediately, because he was so gifted and he was coming out of such a hot storyline, it was picked up immediately on another show. Gorgeous guy, wonderful actor, fabulous person. And all of a sudden, both of those guys were gone, and I was being paired with an older black character actor in a platonic relationship who was playing a congressman who spent most of his time in Washington, D.C. And that's how the show limped along for the next 2 years. You look like you remember that. You must have been a kid. How could you? Anyway, I didn't know what was happening. I thought that I made excuses for her, and I said to myself, oh, well, she's got a whole new soap she has to do with a whole bunch of other characters. She's putting you on a back burner. Well, the soap magazines were furious. They said, what's going on? She's going to, just like Doris Day is going to be the oldest virgin in television, she's in movies, she's going to be the oldest virgin in television. Let's give this poor child a story. And eventually they realized they had to do something. So this is 1972, 4 years later. They brought in Al Freeman, and 40 years later, I would find out, paid him 4 times what they had paid me. Put him out front as the black star of the show, changed Lillian and me into satellites revolving around him as his wife and his mother-in-law. And there was absolutely no chemistry whatsoever, in the sense that he was always out detecting in various white storylines, while Lillian and I were moved back to the kitchen table to sit around and gossip about the neighbors and keep them caught up with what was going on with the white storylines. I mean, we really turned into completely utilitarian characters. And I never saw her to talk to ever again. I think I nodded to her once across a fan gathering at a hotel ballroom, but we never interfaced again for several years. Meanwhile, I was turned over to surrogates that made it very clear to me that don't get any fancy ideas about yourself. Don't think you're first in line, you're last. And that suddenly got to be very, very obvious for a lot of reasons, including the way this occurred. This is about 6 years into the show, maybe 8. Daytime library series, One Life to Live. They did a wonderful thing, Daytime. They made a library series. This is number 6, where they gave each show an entire issue. Mm-hmm. The producer of our show at the time was allowed to, the magazine allowed her to place everyone. There are only 2 original stars from the founding families left. This is 8 years in the show. Doris Bellack, who is brilliant, who played Anna Wolick, later Anna Wolick Craig. There she is. One other original star. That's me, in the back, in a line of men. There were guys on crew, God bless them, that were furious. I got along great with everybody, just management was always the problem. I adored the crew, and they were very fond of me. One guy, handsome, looked like Sean Connery on a good day. Sean Connery on a good day. He was gorgeous. He was greater looking than anybody they had in front of the camera. He was angry. He said, "Honey, they could shove you to the back of the bus, but you're the only one in the whole bunch who looks like a movie star." I never forgot him for that, because you go through so much, you're never quite sure whether something's been done or whether you have a chip on your shoulder or somebody just didn't think too much. But there are all sorts of people in front of me who are absolutely new to the show, and 1 or 2 are new to the industry. That's posed so that no white woman has to look at my back. That's what it's about. And the guys on the crew knew it. And this picture is even more racist than it seems, because I was very aware that Lillian was nowhere in sight. And I wondered if she had been sick. So I called her on the phone later, and I found out they had never let her know that the photo was taking place. So she, Lillian Heyman, my mother, was effectively edited completely out of the picture. Anyway, that's the way they sort of played the game. There was a point in time where Al became very... he felt we were boring everybody to death. So he said, "It's time for one of us to have an affair." Well, Al doesn't write, but I did, and I listened to what he said. And they, by the way, they used my writing from time to time, but only on the proviso that I write for free. They didn't want to pay for it. I did not mind that, and to this day I don't, because there are some things to me that are more important than money. I regarded that as a Faustian bargain, however, one that was acceptable to me, because the opportunity to write and get black characters on that screen that were watched by millions of people, that were more complicated and nuanced and non-stereotypical, I considered better than gold, so I was willing to do it. So because of what Al had said, I wrote the whole Jack Scott storyline. Remember the whole Jack Scott storyline? That's my storyline. I have a 30-page proposal. I wrote out a 30-page proposal. It had to go all the way up to Fred Silverman, who was the CEO at the time, for his imprimatur before it could be put into whatever. The problem was, when it got through that process and came down the line to be got his imprimatur, was about to be put into, there had been a change in the producer at the head of the studio. And because I had supported the previous producer when they were trying to kick her out, he called me up to the office my first day on the show and said, "You're the only person in this entire cast who has not congratulated me on becoming the producer. And he made it clear, he made it clear that he regarded me as an enemy. And I said, I guess you were referring to the letter. Yes, I wrote the letter. It had nothing to do with you. I said I was only being loyal to somebody I thought was very good in the first place, and had also given me the job. So he made it clear that nevertheless we were enemies. And every single thing that happened in relation to that storyline, I was made to pay. First of all, they cast the one person that I begged them not to cast. He called me up to the office and he told me, I'm about to cast this gentleman, and he mentioned his name, I'm about to cast him in the role of Jack Scott. I said, oh, I wish you wouldn't, please. I said, I can tell immediately that we're like oil and water, it's not going to work. It just isn't. No fault of his, no fault of mine, but it is going to be deadly. Please don't do this. I can tell from the audition what it's going to be. He said, well, that's too bad. I'm going to do it. And I had been so good, because I know men don't like tears. They feel like it's dirty pool. Not these days, of course. I mean, everybody's crying, including all our politicians. But back then, the guys didn't do it, just the girls. Okay. So I really started really crying. I said, please don't do this. I said, I not only am the actress that has to play opposite this guy, I'm the writer who created the character. Don't do this to me, please. He said, well, there are times when we know better, and that's the way it's going to be, so get yourself together and, get with the program. Well, he hired him, and the guy, from the moment he appeared on camera, I started getting phone calls from the black theater community. One girl told Lillian, an actress by the name of P.D. Trigg, said, he's going to lose her the job. And I thought that was pretty much hyperbole. But when they have relationships, they don't have people meet right away. They introduce the guy, and he works for about 3 or 4 weeks before he meets who's the girl that's supposed to be the love of his life or whatever, or so on. For 3 or 4 weeks, I was told by the cast that he was flubbing all over the place, that he didn't learn his lines, that they were having to do takes and what have you. And the producer was sitting up there in the control room, and he knew that what was going on had nothing to do with me. But once I started working with him, he blamed me. He called me up to the office. He said, he shook a finger in my face. He said, you're intimidating him, you're sabotaging him, you're trying to make your predictions come true. Cut that out, do you understand? And I had to go through 2 years of that on a 3-year contract. My back became so frozen because every day that I went into work, I had to pray that somebody else's work didn't open me up to attack. It's terrifying to know that you cannot control your situation because it doesn't depend on what you do. It depends on what somebody else does. I put up with everything that I could possibly put up with in the situation. But when it got close to the end of the 3-year contract, I realized that I was going to have to make a decision as to whether it's one thing to do what you have to do when you're contracted to a show. It's another thing to sign up for more of same. I got together all of my wherewithal. I went over his head and made an appointment with Josie Emmerich as the senior vice president in charge of daytime television, and I laid out the whole thing for her from start to finish. I said, look, I need the job desperately. This is the only job I've ever had on a camera that lasted more than a week. I have to be able to sign. But I said, unless you can change this what's going on, I cannot sign for the sake of my own health. And she clucked like she was concerned and whatever and so on, but nothing changed. And so when it came time to sign, I said, I cannot do this anymore. I cannot resign. And so she took me out to lunch, and she said that she said, oh, well, you know, with somebody as talented as you are, obviously you want to move on. I said, Josie, be real. So all of a sudden, overnight, Jean Harley was gone. And a new producer came on the show, and this is how he introduced himself to me. I saw this furious somebody in an Ernest Hemingway safari suit stamping across the set, looking like he was about to smack me in the face, and he came over and he said, so close that his spit flew in my face, and I had to pin my arms to my hands because I didn't want to wipe off my face because I knew that would be taken as an insult. He said, get that hair off your neck. You're the DA. And he made a military turn and then went stamping across the set. Now, the first, my gut said, you're toast, there go your kids. That's what my gut said. Then my head said, this can't be happening. You've been too valuable to this show. This can't be happening. Well, I didn't know what to make of it because it was done. The other guy was smart enough to keep the door closed and only give me the business when nobody else was around. This guy was saying this to me on an open set where the crew was right there. There were actors. Everybody could see it. The fact that it was done in public, my mind started doing terrible tricks because I thought to myself, he had just come from a vetting by top brass. There's no way that a new hire would publicly go after a member of the cast unless that cast had been identified at the vetting as a target. My mind was just clicking like a... Anyway, I was in a panic. I flew to my little... I was so glad that I didn't have to go back to Westchester. I flew to my little studio that I had just bought. I got out a pair of scissors and I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and did a horrible job on my hair. Mind you, he treated me like I had Alice in Wonderland hair, like Ann Coulter, for instance. It was truly on my neck. It didn't even come to my shoulders. It was up here on my neck. But anyway, I was ready to shave it and go bald, if that's what he said. Anyway, I got out the scissors, and the job I did on my hair looked pretty awful. It was pretty raggedy because I couldn't keep my hands steady. Anyway, I came in the following day, and my hair was gone. Looked a mess, but it was gone. He looked at me, and he was shocked, and I thought to myself, what's his problem? I just did what he told me to do. Well, I found out later. It took me a while to realize what was going on. He realized that what he was trying to do was start an abrasive relationship with me, so we would have some ugly back and forth and he could get me that way. But I had obeyed his orders. So he had to figure out something that I couldn't do. So he chose my voice. I was accused of having a voice that was an offense to the public that should be taken off the air, and he posited it as if it were a crisis. I'd been on the air for 17 years, offending the public. But anyway, he insisted that it was a question of, you get yourself to a voice teacher and you change that voice, or else. So it was made very clear that unless I changed my voice, now from what to what he refused to say. He told both directors, Peter Miner and David Pressman, he tried to enlist them in getting after me to change that voice. They refused. Peter Miner told me they refused to have anything to do with it. David wouldn't even discuss it because David, he said, I'm not even going to discuss that. That's so ridiculous. I'm not going to discuss it. Peter was more sensitive because he realized what a beating I was taking, it was. So Peter said to me, I said, what does he want me to change it to? He said he won't say. He won't characterize it any kind of way that he can be pinned for. He doesn't say it's too high or it's too low or it's too nasal or it's too whatever. So he said, but here's a voice teacher. He said, I know this is crazy. He said, if you start with a voice teacher, you'll be obeying his orders. What can he do? So I called the woman up on the phone. Mind you, after playing half of the great roles in the Shakespeare canon, after playing Marguerite Gautier in Camino Real, and it is Camino Real, it's the American pronunciation, not the Spanish pronunciation, in the Tennessee Williams play. I had done it for Michael Kahn and gotten stunning reviews. He said, Ellen, I can quote my reviews. He said, Ellen Holly is a beautiful chameleon, Marguerite, and how exciting she makes her acting. Her voice is as thrilling to listen to as a young Irene Worth. Now, to be compared, to have your voice called thrilling by a first-night critic and compared to Irene Worth, the legendary stage actress, and here you have a soap opera producer telling you that your voice is an offense to the public that should be taken off. Come on. I knew it was crazy, but he was such a weird character. I wondered if he had ears like a dog and maybe heard something in my voice that nobody else heard. You know, I didn't really know what was going on. Anyway, I called the woman and she said, what's supposed to be wrong? I said, I don't know. I said, they won't tell me. So she said, well, go back and ask them, you know, as if it were the simplest thing in the world to do. So I went back and I was too panicked to go up into, I did not want to go into a room alone with him and be screamed at and whatever. I saw him at the coffee urn one day and I said, I've called up a voice teacher and I'm hoping to study with her. Could you tell me what is supposed, she wants to know what's wrong with my voice. Could you tell me what she should be working on? He said, I can't put my finger on it, but you better do something about it. That's an exact quote. Now look, actors can't hear themselves because their voice resonates in their head. Nobody hears themselves. Their voice resonates in their head. So they hear something, every human being hears something different than somebody outside that doesn't have that resonant thing. Nobody knows how they sound. If he can't put his finger on how I sound, how am I supposed to put my finger on how I, you know, I mean, it was all such nonsense. All it was about was to find something that he could beat me to death with over and over and over and over again, so that when there were only 2 or 3 days to the close of my contract, he could call me up in the office and say, first thing in the morning, real sadistic guy. I mean, even somebody who's will tell you at the end of the day so that you can escape. In 1988, I had heard nothing from her at all. She had never said anything. Nor ABC never, the network never acknowledged that I was. The only people who gave me flowers were, and the people I cared about, really. The other actors, the ladies in wardrobe, guys on the crew, the hairdressers, you know, these were all the security guards. These were the people that gave me all my bye-bye bouquets. I got nothing. The management turned their backs and behaved as if this just hadn't happened. Okay. Agnes Nixon gets on a phone. This is 3 years later. She tells me that she had just heard. I know. She had just heard that I had been let go and how terribly she felt about it, but that she hadn't had anything to do with One Life to Live for years, and which what I would find out was not true. I mean, a year later in 1989, they did a profile on her, and she was very much still functioning as the top consultant to the show, from which perch she would have signed off on getting rid of me. Anyway, she asked me she said, there are only 2 people, I want you to know how important it is to me for you to come. There are only 2 people from my entire career that I am inviting to share this with me, you and Susan Nucci. So anyway, she, somewhere around here, I have she sent me her remarks in the mail that she was going to deliver at the museum. And I have a copy. I'll show you. It's only 30 pages long, and she goes into everything, her childhood in Tennessee and all the things that she wrote before she finally was asked to do her own shows and all the various shows that she did and what have you. In that 30 thing, she spends 4 pages talking about me. She always talks about me. She talked about me up at Harvard, the other day. I'm her historical legacy. She keeps talking about me, It's almost like she has a double life. I'm the person she always talks about. The other people are the people that she always pays. Anyway, between Susan and Lucci and me, we were the two. We were presented. If you read her remarks, which I still have a copy, I'll give you a copy to keep. You can read all her remarks. She presents us as the 2 most valuable stars she ever worked with. And the audience would never have dreamed how different our situations were. These were my annual salaries. As reported on my after-annual earnings statements, I think they're net rather than gross, but you will still get some idea. These are all for almost 8 years in the $20,000 a year. I make more here than I do 4 years later. I told you, come 1971, I was pulled back and marginalized. The only reason why it gets better is because this is around the time that it gets doubled. The show goes from a half an hour to 45 minutes, then to an hour. This is around the 45-minute thing. This is around the hour thing. And half of that whole thing, this is when I came back on the show and insisted on being paid better, paid the $150,000. These were the years I spent off the show. All this, added up, comes to something like $700,000 something. All of this. I worked 17 years to put together, to earn. This is what Susan earned, that she was presenting to the museum as of equal weight with me. This is from a TV Guide article called Lucci called in 1990. So it's pretty close to. Okay. This is Agnes Nixon talking to the magazine. According to All My Children creator and head writer Agnes Nixon, Lucci even has a clause written into her contract that gives her time off for the children's first days back to school and their vacations. And to top it off, her contract allows her to get involved in other TV projects at a reported $1.3 million a year. Her salary is one of the highest earned by any daytime star. Is it any wonder that she considers herself the luckiest actress in television? Now, what is interesting, and what the audience at the museum did not know, was that I had to work 17 years to earn what Susan earns in 7 months. And Susan will be given 40-some-odd years to make her kind of money. Okay. They also would not have known that I had been dropped 3 years earlier. On the 20th anniversary of the show, this is the year 1988. That took place in January of 1988, the whole business at the museum. At the last moment, I couldn't go because of a medical thing. I thought I was dying. I was on Sloan Kettering, at Sloan Kettering on a gurney, supposedly dying of pancreatic cancer. A doctor had seen a shade on an X-ray, and so I thought I was on my way out. So those remarks that she made at the theater, that she had made, the remarks she had sent me, that she was going to deliver that evening, I had looked over them very, very sketchily because I was busy with other things in my head, like dying. Anyway, my family informed her that I could not come at the last minute, but that initiated a correspondence between us for a while that is very enlightening. Anyway, as the show went on, they kept, Agnes Nixon kept talking about me as if I was so crucial to everything that she was doing. She still talks about, she always talks about me, because that is her historical legacy. And from then on, everything was in terms of her historical legacy. Where I was concerned, she started allowing, not only was she anxious to have her White Star become the veteran of the show, her White Star began to trivialize all the history that had preceded her, so that officially the show begins in 1971 with Erica Slezak. And this is the beginning of it, in the 20th anniversary of the... Erica made this statement: "We don't have poor people in Landview." This was the soap opera, this was quoted from Soap Opera Digest. I have that digest here. You know, you can check it out, the thing. "We don't have poor people in Landview. We don't have any more black people in Landview. We have no ethnic people. No, this is now a story about rich people and richer people. We're all haves now. That changed when Agnes Nixon let go of the show after 5 years. It was Aggie who set those things up and structured them so tightly." Now, that's a lot less straightforward than it appears, because there's a lot of misinformation there. In the first place, it's kind of patronizing to feel that the poor and the ethnic and black people need a special kind of structured writing to make it work. We need the same thing as everybody else, good writing, and that's it. But there's also misinformation in terms of how long we had been on the show. The implication here is, when she says that changed when Agnes let go of the show after 5 years, no blacks. We were there 17 years. Not 5, and she was there the whole time. She knows that. And then also to claim that it was on the basis of class rather than race is also absurd. This is now a story about rich people and richer people. Well, no, you know. I mean, Al was the captain of police and I was the district attorney. We were not exactly poor. And they kept Meryl and Chris 9 years longer than they kept me. And she was playing Wanda Webb, the waitress in a diner who had married Vinnie Woloch, the auto mechanic. Hardly rich. Had nothing to do with class. It had to do with race. I read that in the 20th anniversary issue and went straight to a lawyer, because now I realized they had gotten rid of us because we were black. However, I plunked all my stuff down on the lawyer's desk. The lawyer got in touch with me after she'd looked through it. She said, "If you had shown me this in time, you would have probably walked away with it. You had a Title VII case. But Title VII has a 3-year statute of limitation on it. And you know law is just run out. You no longer have a case." So that's why they kept Al, pulled a couple of blacks on. They had all been, at the very end, when they were no longer legally in trouble in terms of getting rid of Lillian and me, just like a firing squad. They just, so that there would be no more black people. But they had waited until we would no longer have a suit. Very clear. The same time that all this is occurring in 1988, this is from USA Today, Nielsen Research came out with a landmark research study called Television Viewing Among Blacks that posited the importance of blacks to the daytime audience in general and ABC soaps in particular. And here they have the list of the top shows that are favorites among black viewers. All 3 ABC soaps are on that list. And in an ironic asterisk, more than they might have guessed at, they also put in the note, except for One Life, all have black storylines. In other words, the Carla storyline that had put all those 3 ABC shows on that list, I had been, even though I was most responsible for putting all those 3 ABC shows on that list. I was 3 years gone. Now, this is why they had to get rid of us. This is the 25th anniversary. All the optics are white. That's why they had to get rid of us. They couldn't take picture of two black women and all of that. However, on the inside, this is how they have their cake and eat it too. Daytime's fearless soap. They're still parading themselves as revolutionary. Celebrates 25 heavenly years. We had a totally integrated cast, says creator Agnes Nixon of her former baby, One Life to Live. I wanted to take soaps out of Wasp Valley. You know. Now, to legitimize that thing, they have the rest of the page about the Carla storyline. However, it's written as if it's in present time. This is a 20-year-old quote. That's how far in the archives they went back to legitimize the fearlessness of the soap and Agnes Nixon's. This is 20 years old, but it sounds like I'm still part of the family. I'm giving a current interview about the beginning days of the show. And, you know, I mean, that's... This is Jill Nelson. I'm going to close with this because it sums up my entire experience except for the two shows. Those first 2 years on the show. This sums up perfectly in these few words exactly what my life was on that show. Yeah, this is from her book. This is the brilliant black writer Jill Nelson. This is what she says about working on she was one of the first blacks on the Washington, working for the Washington Post. Fortunately, they've changed now, but this is what it's like. This is what pioneering is like, folks. For many of the black folks there, the Washington Post is neither heaven nor hell, but some weird journalistic purgatory, a seemingly endless proving ground on which, just when you think you've won the game, the rules are changed. This is nothing new for African Americans, corporate or otherwise, but it does tend to make some of us crazy. Whatever field we're in, we have to justify ourselves daily to people who'd rather we weren't around.
By Betty Ray.
She was the
very famous casting director. Everybody speaks really highly of her. Did she? I mean, did they just call you up for the role,
yes.
or did you have to?
No, she called me for the role. Right. I was surprised by it, and of course, you know, charmed.
It was on 2 year run, right? Was it supposed to be that long originally, or did you just?
No, it was. I was supposed to be a judge in a trial, and it was extended. Certainly, the trial didn't happen 1, 2, 3. I mean, it was really rather lengthy. But for some reason or other, they were quite wonderful. And at one point, I think I even married a couple. Somewhere I have a tape on that where I was Frances Collier on Guiding Light. Mm-hmm. The one I remember was Nia.
Nia Long.
Nia Long, because we had a conversation about it at the time, about the wedding. I remember I was at yes.
Oh, Hamp and Julie's wedding. There was a big wedding.
Yes, I think it was the wedding. There was a wedding. There was a wedding that I presided at, and there was also a wedding that I don't know whether it was the same wedding. I mean, people get married all the time. Right?
Multiple times per year.
I'm not sure. But I remember sitting down and having a rather long conversation about weddings, because first of all, my wedding had been the first African-American wedding in daytime. So it was considered a landmark wedding at the time, and that was the one where Hazel Scott had come with her sidemen, and she played my aunt, just sitting down sort of casually, and with the band that had been hired you know, it was part of the storyline.
Right.
The band.
She wrote an original song for that, I think.
Yes, she did. I have it upstairs.
Oh wow! I was just the thing is those episodes aren't all around anymore. You know,
everything in the first 10 years of the show, it doesn't exist anymore.
So I constantly read this stuff and I can't get enough.
Except you may have access to the kind of technology that can take something that had very, very old-fashioned technology and bring it up to, is that possible?
Well, you know, I'm currently, one of my many side projects is I'm editorial director with a company called Soap Classics, and they're taking old P&G soaps, taking the old master tapes and digitizing them and putting them out on DVDs now. So.
Oh, how interesting! Because I have in things, and this you obviously will realize this is very, very old technology. We're in cans like this. You know.
Like the kinescope?
I'm not sure.
Let's take a look.